It kind of makes me sad that I'm saying that over a computer and not to your smiling faces. But unfortunately, this is the new normal, at least for a few weeks. I'm going to be trying to put out content on YouTube. That way, you guys can still get messages and stuff. So we can still be, talking about the Bible and whatnot. So I'm going to be doing that on YouTube, email, probably on Instagram too, on our student page. So just trying to get as much stuff as I can to you guys in this weird time. But I'm still excited to talk about the Bible. We can use this technology, um, you know, to continue learning about God and talking about the Bible. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We can be, upset about the way things are right now, or we can see it as an opportunity. We've talked before about how we don't have a lot of time to spend with God for whatever reason. Maybe it's sports, maybe it's for you guys at school, or homework, jobs, whatever it is. Well, now we don't have those excuses, right? Now I feel like it is such a weird time, but uh, and it's unfortunate things are this way. But I think it's an opportunity for all of us to really reevaluate where we're at in our relationship with Jesus and just the way that we spend time with Him. I think we during the school year we get in such a routine of all the things that we have to do, and I don't think Bible reading is often as high on the list as it can be. But now, we can complain about not having as many things to do, but I think God's giving us an opportunity to really grow closer to Him. And so, you guys can use these next 2 weeks, for a lot of different things, but I think it really can be used to develop your relationship with Jesus. Because even though we're quarantined right now, if you read through the New Testament, the gospel is never quarantined. You can't really ever slow down the spread of the gospel. And so, even though we can't meet together at church, we can't meet with our small groups, we can't interact with our friends at school. I think technology and social media and all these things are opening up ways for us to share about our faith that we might not take advantage of all the time because we're so distracted with other things. So look for ways that you guys can continue to be a light for God in the midst of this whole situation. There are lots of people living without hope. And so continue to stay in touch with your friends from church, encouraging one another, and encouraging our friends that don't attend our small groups or attend Southwest. Like, they need it just as much because they don't have the hope in the gospel maybe that we do. And so I think, these next few weeks or however long this lasts can be an opportunity to study the Bible and really, get to know God in a new way. And so that's what we're going to continue trying to do. So we're going to go ahead and jump into, this is going to be week 3 of our Doubt It series. And this is actually going to be a little bit of a recap for junior high, but that's okay. I think this lesson is extremely relevant to what we're facing today. So we're actually going to look at the story of Job. And if you guys haven't read the story of Job, it's in the Old Testament, and it probably takes place sometime during the book of Genesis. And so Moses is usually attributed as the author of the book of Job. And so, these are real events. It's a real story of a real person. These things happen to. So we open up and we read the book of Job, and it starts by saying that there is a man who is righteous. And even God considers him to be a righteous person. And so it kind of skips to basically a heavenly scene, so in front of God. And it says that basically the angels are there, in front of God, and of course Satan shows up. So Satan kind of says that the only reason that Job is following after God is because God has blessed him. Job has basically he's kind of wealthy in the day. He's got a lot of animals, and he has, according to the Bible, like a nice family. So everything kind of is going right for Job. And so Satan says, well, if things weren't going right, then, he wouldn't be so righteous. He wouldn't be following you. And I think that might be true for a lot of people that we know, is that, they're only following God because things are right. And then when you see, unfortunately, when God, when things are taken away from them, they turn away from God. And so that's kind of what Satan is accusing Job of being like. And so, God's like, well, that's not true, but I'm going to allow you to take away Job's possessions. Like you can do what you wish with his stuff, because we know Satan, unfortunately, has that power and authority if God allows him. And I think that's a key word, is God has to allow it. So it's not God doing these things to Job. It's God allowing Satan. And so Job obviously doesn't see what's going on in the heavenly realms, but all of a sudden, Job gets this messenger, kind of goes back to the earthly scene, and Job gets this messenger that basically all of his animals have been taken, or killed, by enemy people. So he finds that out, and then another messenger runs and tells Job that all of his children were in a house, and for there was a storm and the house collapsed. And that's all the detail we get from that scene. But Job kind of responds with grief, as one would imagine. So Job is upset, but Job doesn't. The Bible makes it clear that Job doesn't curse God. He doesn't really blame God, but he is frustrated, and so it kind of flips back to the heavenly realm, and we see Satan again says, "Well, just taking away his possessions doesn't matter, but if you took away his health, that would make him stop following you." God says, "Well, okay, just do whatever you want to him." So we go back to earth, and Satan attacks Job's body. It says that there's boils and sores that appear all over Job's body, incredibly painful. And so Job has basically all of his family except his wife taken away, all of his possessions. Now he's in physical and emotional pain. And so what we get from Job next is he cries out to God. And he kind of says, just why is this happening to me? He doesn't understand. And even he kind of writes this poem in a sense, and he says, I wish I hadn't even been born. Cursed is that day, because now look at me. Like, he just hates where he's at, because he's done his best part to follow God, and he can't understand why God would allow that to happen. And so he cries out to God continuously, and the strange part is God doesn't answer him. We would think, being a Bible story, that God would just show up and answer him. Like, all these terrible things happen, and God knows why. God knows why these things are happening, but God does not answer him. And so I think this story can hit home for some of us, especially now more than ever, because of all the things that some of us might be going through. There might be a lot of confusing things, maybe things with our family. I know this is a really uncertain time for a lot of people. And so there's fear, there's frustration, there's anger. And so there's a lot of reasons some of us might be angry with God or confused with God. And that's okay. I think that's what this story kind of indicates, is that's okay when things in our life are happening and we don't understand why. When they're honestly, when they're going terribly and we can't really figure out why. Where it's okay for us to ask God those questions, and I think we see Job doing that. He's asking God why these things are happening. He has that freedom to do that, and so the last couple of times that we met, before all this started, so a few weeks ago, we said that it's okay for us to ask questions about our faith, about God, about the Bible. Like, that's okay. That's normal. And also we learned from the story of Thomas that and Gideon, that God doesn't shame us for having doubts, and asking him things. But what the story of Job reminds us is that our questions don't always get answered. When horrible things happen, we want God to tell us why. When it seems like nothing is going right, and really when it seems like our world is falling apart, no matter what's happening in the world, around us, in the world as a whole, when it's just our world, even like Job, it just feels like it's falling apart, and we're losing everyone that we care about, or just things that we were hoping for just don't seem to happen, and nothing is going right, and we need some sort of answer. And so we're going to jump back into the story all the way in chapter 38. And so from the time in chapter 3 where Job is kind of wishing he hadn't been born, and crying out to God, Job has friends, and these friends try to help Job, and basically they don't. They say it's all his fault these things are happening, or And some even say, well, God has a plan. And, that's just not the most helpful thing to say, because we don't know what that plan is. And so if you jump back in the story in chapter 38, God actually finally responds. He shows up to Job, and he appears as this big storm, this whirlwind is what the Bible describes it as. And so God responds in an interesting way. So he says that I am the creator. He says that I'm in control. And he tells Job, he says, I'm bigger than you could ever imagine. And that's it. That's the extent of his response. Now, I mean, he says that in more words than I just summarized it in. But that is it. That's his whole response. And you know what? That was okay with Job. He was humbled by that. And here's why. In his story, he wanted to know why so many terrible things were happening. And he didn't get the answer that he was looking for. But what he did get was an encounter with his creator. And that was enough for Job. He had the freedom to ask questions. He had the freedom to go to God and express his frustrations, his hurt, his doubt. But now he got confirmation that God heard him, that God was listening. And I think that we can take comfort that no matter what's going on in our lives, no matter who we lose, no matter when we can go back to school, no matter what's happening with our future, we can take comfort in the fact that God knows what we're going through, that he cares for us, that he's listening to our prayers, even if he doesn't remove us from the difficult situation. Because, we live in a sinful world. Even if we're following after God, like, bad things still happen to us, to the people we love. And we might not understand why they're happening, but we can be confident in the midst of them that we can talk to God and experience him through Jesus. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good. And that's such a powerful verse, but I think sometimes it's misunderstood. It's saying that only good things happen, but that's not the case, right? When we're following God, all things in our lives just don't always go right. We wish they would, but a lot of times there's lessons in that we can learn, or God can be just drawing us closer to himself, or honestly, we might not ever get the answer. There are so many things that happen in our lives, good and bad, that we don't maybe understand why. And we don't ever really get to when we're on this earth. And so that verse in Romans, I think Paul is emphasizing that all things work together for our good, whether we understand it or not, or whether we think it's good or not. Sometimes what's best for us isn't always what's best for us. If you think back, if you guys have ever tried to feed a baby or a toddler vegetables, most times they don't like it, but it's what's best for them, right? But they don't always like the experience of doing it. And I think that's sometimes God allows things to happen in our lives that are frustrating, they're painful. Some of them are just part of life. The fact that we live in a simple world, but we have the hope in Jesus, and that gets us through. And so we experience frustration and pain. We can ask God why, and sometimes he seems to be silent. But in those times, and especially in times that we're living in right now, we need to remember this: that God can redeem whatever situation we're going through. And sometimes his answer is simply that we can't see what he's doing or what his purpose is. And in those moments, he might not actually give us an answer in our prayers. I know there have been times that I've prayed about things, and I felt like God has given me an answer, but then there's others where frankly he's silent, and that can be frustrating. But even if we don't get an answer to every one of our questions, we can still have faith in our Redeemer. And I think that's the good news that we get from the story of Job, is that we don't always get an explanation, but we always get to have an encounter with our Creator. Through Jesus, we always get to experience God. We always get to talk to God, and I think that's a perfect reminder for what we're going through right now. I know some of us more than others are hurting right now, or more fearful, or in families that honestly there's a lot of uncertainty financially, or really, there's a lot of different ways that this whole thing is impacting us. And so especially right now in this time of all this virus uncertainty. I think we just need to rest in who God is and the fact that we can go to Him when we have questions, and even if He doesn't answer the way that we want, um, we still get to have an encounter with Him. We still get to experience God in unique ways. Uh, He doesn't stop loving us. He doesn't get mad at us for asking God questions or asking Him why these things are happening. But I think it just kind of can put things into perspective. And so at the end of the story of Job, Job gets everything back and more. God blesses him, and Job lived his whole life and never knew why those things were happening. And so even if God doesn't, restore all the things that we wanted or give us everything that we hoped for, you know, sometimes He gives us things that we don't even recognize. And so, like I said, we have an opportunity these next 2 weeks to really make a kingdom impact. Because all the people that are always saying they're too busy to come to church, well, they might not be too busy to watch a 15-minute video about the book of Job. We have an opportunity to share with them the gospel, even if we're not meeting face to face. And so, while I hate that I've just spent this amount of time talking into a computer and not, being interrupted by whatever shenanigans you guys are doing at church, whatever questions you guys have, like I love interacting with you guys, but yet we are blessed that we have this technology that we get to share with one another. And so we are still the church, even if we're not meeting in the church building. And so, I just want to encourage you guys, keep being, like Jesus to other people, even if you're, staying 6 feet away from them. We can still make a kingdom impact. That way, when we can meet in the building again, we have even more people that want to come. I think that gives, this is an opportunity. And so we have to see it that way. So I'm going to be sending out some questions related to this lesson over the next couple of days. And then stay tuned. There'll be more content like this upcoming. I miss you guys. I can't wait to see you again. Thanks for watching.